this is very much embedded in our culture, gender fluidity, being gay, being bakla, being tomboy, being however the definition and how it changes. In our language, Tagalog, we don't even have he or she. We have siya, which is gender neutral. It is in our language, the understanding of gender fluidity. And again, we could go into like a conversation of colonization and all that, because it's important to say those things, because these are the forces that influences, that leads to suffering of people, the suffering of children, because their shame and they put the stigma in their most precious expression. It's because of those influence of colonization, which is through introduction of Catholicism in the Philippines, because it's in our blood. In pre-colonial Philippines, we have, the babaylan, our spiritual leaders. I have a tattoo called Lakapati, which is like our pre-colonial transgender fluid goddess of fertility and harvest, because we were an animist culture before that.
How gracious of you na you were a victim in the Philippines of this, but you're also understanding. That's impressive to me.
I'd say this. Give me goosebumps just like saying that. I have to be compassionate first with myself, because I've been in that journey. I understand it didn't happen to me overnight, but certainly when I found out the truth, I do want to share it, because there is the other side of sharing the truth about our history and the root causes of homophobia, transphobia in our culture, in Filipino culture, because this was brought to us. This never existed in our history. So whether it's the knowledge or unpacking and really internalizing my pre-colonial understanding of gender fluidity in our culture, it's something na gusto kong laging pag-usapan, because it's in us. Our ancestors have always been in us. Even some people have asked me, in Tagalog or Filipino, sometimes I get confused like he or she. Even now, it's in our language. I remember nung bago kong dating sa Amerika na every time ako confused ako he or she, I get shamed by that, by people. Oh, mali yung sinabi mong ganun. I understand now why we say he, she, and we get confused with that. It's not a confusion. It's our ancestors telling us we don't have he or she. Gender is fluid, so don't adhere to that. It's in your very language. So I think to say that and to make a point, because when we don't understand these things, when we don't see the truth in our history and the root causes of this, it leads to suffering. That is why, in the Philippines, we still have the anti-discrimination, bill. It's still in the Congress for 20 years. Always constantly being stopped by the Catholic Church. I honor the long, vibrant history of activism in the Philippines. The people that are doing incredible work on the ground just to demand the most basic rights of protection. Something is wrong, if that's been happening over and over. I think it's time to really, deep within why. But I think the bigger conversation is equity, which is like equitable representation.
Exactly.
I mean, for trans people, for me, when I was joining pageants in the Philippines, for us, it's our way to make money, because there's a lot of trans pageant. That was my career when I was 15. For some folks, maybe, for the government, for, the Catholic Church, they might just see that as an entertainment,
Exactly. That's what I was going to say too. Because for the others that I've interviewed before, there was one, she talked about how, yes, she was accepted by her parents, but her siblings, for instance, did not. She would wake up na nakatali siya sa kama para hindi siya makaalis, para hindi siya makasali ng pageant. It was, and grow, after a while growing up, she's had to prove herself. She had to get a degree. And even now, talking to her siblings, sinasabi niya na ayaw kasi nila na normally the connotation of trans women in the Philippines are anong kinahihinatnan, nagiging escort, nagiging different, nagiging comedians sa mga gay bars, ganyan. And families, we want more for our family members. Yun yung yun yung nakikitang problema. And I think it's still true to now. And that's why I highlight people, trans personalities like yourself, like the ones I've interviewed last year, na you've made a career on your own, regardless of whether you are male or female or trans.
Yeah. I'd say this, I mean, those things that people, this stereotype of you know, of what trans people do or what they end up doing, there is the other side of the conversation. There are many factors why it leads to that. It's because we don't have anti-discrimination protection that feels the need for trans people to have a job, you know. We don't have identification that match who we are. So when you apply for a job, you get discriminated right away. Like, instead of the conversation for an HR person about your job advantages, qualification, it's already, you're coming in there, you know, with disadvantage because you're now being questioned about your gender. So it affects all aspects of systems kapag hindi nating na-upheld yung rights, the most basic rights of trans people. So of course those things happen, you know. But because those things happen, it doesn't mean that's the only thing that happens, you know.
Right. It's not the only opportunity.
It's not the only opportunity. But then again, the bigger conversation, we need to look at things in a systematic, you know, context, because there are many systems and factors that made the life of a trans Filipino the way it is. You know, I have many trans Filipino friends that excel in fields of call center. They're managers, they're directors, you know, because somehow also, unfortunately, those companies adhere to global standards that supports LGBTQ rights, you know. It's sad to say that, you know, somehow, you know, as a trans person, for you to find, you know, your place in the world, it has to be a company that is not rooted in, you know, or like started in the Philippine economy. You know, it has to be an import outside, you know, because we don't have the rights, you know, the most basic rights. So let's have that conversation before before people start just focusing on the stereotypes of conditions of a life as a trans person.
Right.